Hi everyone, I think about that sometimes. Usually in the quiet of the afternoon after the kids have left for school and I have the house to myself. It's funny how a vibrant home can feel so empty after everyone has gone for the day, leaving only the sound of the refrigerator and my own footsteps echoing as I wander from room to room. I suppose that's just a part of how life has become a constant change that we all follow, but I'm the only one who pauses to notice when I was 22 when I first met John, and he was 25. He had already found a job at a company that valued his ability to solve problems, and he was very good at it. I admired him for that. His confidence was quiet but resolute, and it made me feel safe, which was something I hadn't had growing up in a chaotic home where practicality was the last thing on anyone's mind. We fell in love quickly, caught up in that youthful moment. Assurance that everything else will work itself out if you love someone enough. At the time, we had little more than an apartment with mismatched furniture and a few friends who were as poor as we were. I painted on the weekends, and he would spend Saturdays working on our car or creating something new for our space. I loved watching him work. His hands were strong and capable, and his focus was so intense that I would occasionally make fun of him by calling him my gad scientist. He would always laugh and pull me close, whispering that I was his own. It's funny how life changes so subtly that you don't even notice until one day you wake up and realize you've been drifting for years. John loved us. We thought we'd struck gold when he got his first big promotion. I was so proud of him, of us. We used his new income to buy our first house, a charming place in an up-and-coming neighborhood. We had dreams for that house, 2 kids, a dog, maybe even a garden in the back. Over the years, we made it happen. Knew that, but his job became his entire world, and I gradually became the wife who kept everything together behind the scenes. The more he did well, the more hours he put in, until he was home only in the evenings, exhausted and worn out, and hardly able to muster the energy to ask me about my day. At first, I tried to pull him back, make him laugh, and get him to look at me the way he used to, but it seemed like he had tunnel vision, and the tunnel ended at work. I began making minor adjustments, almost without realizing it, and dressed up a bit more by. I kept telling myself that he was just busy and that this was only temporary, that we would find our way back to each other. One evening, while looking through old pictures, I came across a picture of us from our first anniversary, smiling so broadly, with his arm around me and his head resting on his shoulder. The look in his eyes at that moment was love, real love, and it made me feel beautiful alive. I had hoped he would notice, but he didn't. Or if he did, he was too exhausted to show it. I started reaching out to old friends I hadn't seen in years, most of whom were in town with their own families and lives, but reconnecting was refreshing because they hadn't changed much, and our conversations reminded me of who I'd been before I'd gotten lost in the role of wife and mother. I started going out more frequently, making it a point to dress up and feel something. I had never asked him why I had felt that way before. It was like I was already invisible to John. A presence he assumed would always be there. I thought it might knock him out of it and make him look up and remember that I was still here, still someone he loved, but his attention remained fixed on his work, his phone, and his spreadsheets. I would tell John that the first time was when he was meeting friends, and he would hardly look up from his computer, just muttering, "Have fun," as he typed away. I got the idea for his birthday party because I thought maybe if he just saw me, he would remember how much we had and how good we could be. I invited our closest friends, decorated the house, got him a gorgeous watch, and even made a playlist of songs from our early dating days. I wore a red dress that I had bought especially for the occasion, something bold, hoping to bring back that old look in his eyes, but as the evening went on, I found myself lost in the crowd. I was laughing and chatting, trying to project happiness, but perhaps I was deceiving. Then there was Michael, one of John's oldest friends, a man I'd known for almost as long as I'd known John. He noticed me, or perhaps it was the dress or the way I laughed a little too loudly, and he stayed close to me. Our conversation was easy and effortless, and I felt a pull between us. Everyone else, but I wasn't fooling myself, and I definitely wasn't fooling John. He stood by the kitchen counter nursing a drink, his eyes flicking to me occasionally, but there was something in his expression that I couldn't place. Disapproval or confusion. Something I hadn't felt in a long time, and as I looked around the room at John still standing alone, I had the odd feeling that Michael saw me in a way that my own husband hadn't in years. The party continued around us, with laughter, clinking glasses, and a low, steady hum of conversation, but all I could feel was this strange simmering restlessness. Every time I looked at JN, he was either staring absently into his glass or on his phone, quietly conversing with one of his coworkers. I couldn't quite put my finger on why his. At first, I felt self-conscious, but the warmth of his attention was intoxicating. He didn't rush through our conversation the way John did these days, as if every exchange was a hurdle to get over before moving on to something else. Michael listened to my stories, laughed at them, and when I brushed a loose strand of hair, he seemed true to himself. Distance felt so pointed, as if he was the one leaving me bit by bit, even standing right there in the room. Maybe it was the wine, maybe it was the loneliness I'd been carrying for years, but for the first time I didn't pull back. I threw myself into the night talking, laughing, and flirting in a way I hadn't in a long time. His gaze lingered just a second too long behind my ear, and when John finally noticed, his expression was one I couldn't quite read. I told myself it was just his usual guardedness, the same subtle frown he wore whenever he felt out of place. When John returned from his call, he looked directly at me, barely acknowledging the gift I had given him. I watched as he held it in his hands. Years of friends who hadn't seen me in a long time raised eyebrows, making fun of me for the sparkle they said had returned, and perhaps they were right. I felt that spark, a confidence and freedom I hadn't allowed myself since before we were married. I found myself thinking that perhaps this was what I'd been missing all along, a reminder of what it felt like to be wanted and a little reckless. When the night finally came to an end, everyone said their goodbyes, hugging me tightly and thanking me for a great evening. Michael was among the last to depart. He stood by the door with his eyes lingering on mine as we exchanged a warm, lingering hug. I turned it over like a stranger's possession and then set it aside with a courteous smile. The disappointment in my chest hardened into something I couldn't name, something that made me feel hollow and distant from him, like I was slipping further and further away, but he was the one pushing me. He pulled away from me, his eyes searching mine as if he were waiting for me to say something or give some indication, but I didn't. Instead, I smiled and gave him a quick pat on the back, whispering a quiet good night as I watched him slip out the door. When John and I finally locked up the house and got into bed, I lay there next to him, back to me, breathing in the lingering scent of wine and cologne. I felt a strange mixture of relief and, as the room fell silent, I wanted to turn to him and shake him out of his reverie. I wanted him to know that I had noticed the way he had been staring at me the entire night, and that I felt like I had been holding my breath for years. However, neither he nor I spoke, and the silence grew thicker until I could take it no more. I tiptoed out of bed and slipped into the living room, where I curled up on the couch and lay in the dark, reliving the night and recalling how Michael's eyes had. The next few weeks went by in a blur, and every day I thought about that night when I woke up and went through the motions of getting the kids ready for school, checking the calendar, making notes about groceries, and running errands. It was like I was a machine going through the same routine while my mind wandered. I didn't even see Michael again, but the memory of his gaze lingered, causing a restlessness that I couldn't get rid of. I started filling my time with little distractions, anything that felt like a reminder of who I used to be. John, as usual, left early and returned home late. His attention was focused on his work, and his conversations with me were brief and functional. I picked up my painting again, something I hadn't done in years, and let the colors and shapes consume me in the long empty hours. It was a mess, to be honest, swirling colors chaotic and undefined, but somehow it made sense. I felt a quiet sense of satisfaction as I worked, a release I hadn't felt in a long time. Even though it was just a simple, harmless slime, I found myself staring at it as I was cleaning up my brushes that evening when my phone buzzed with a text from Michael saying, "Hey, I'm thinking of you, I hope you're well." I knew I shouldn't respond because this was dangerous territory, but my fingers moved almost instinctively as I typed back, "Hey you, it's good to hear from you, how have you been?" The conversation flowed easily back and forth, with each message from him feeling like a lifeline. We didn't talk about that night and didn't acknowledge the unspoken tension that had lingered between us at the party, but I could feel it simmering beneath our words as if we were both aware of the line we were inching toward without fully acknowledging it. He made me laugh and brought me out of the monotony of my day as we talked about everything and nothing, the work life, and old memories from college. For those few moments, I felt alive in a way I hadn't in so long. As he worked late into the night, I found myself looking forward to JN. He didn't seem to notice, barely looking at me, leaving me alone with my phone and the quiet thrill of Michael's words. I knew it was wrong that I was playing with fire, but it felt too good to stop. It was like waking up from a long gray dream and finding the parts of myself that I thought I'd buried long ago. Then, one afternoon while going through old photos, I received another message from Michael saying that he would love to see me in person. How about coffee next week? I stared at my heart pounded as I read his words, but I also knew what I wanted to say. I took a deep breath and typed back a single word. Yes, the idea had begun innocently enough. At least that's what I kept telling myself. It was just coffee and a little time to talk with Michael in a more private setting away from prying eyes and the bustle of a busy cafe. I had taken care to make sure the kids were at school, John would be at work, and I would even spend the morning cleaning the house as if. Michael came in first, and his easy smile helped to calm the nerves that had been building in my stomach all morning. However, as soon as he walked through the door, I saw two familiar faces behind him, Tim and Eric. They were two of John's friends who had attended the birthday party, and I blinked in a strange mix of surprise and apprehension. "Oh, I hope you don't mind," Michael said casually, stepping in with the two of them as we bumped into each other. It was okay, these were friends, familiar faces, and there was nothing wrong with a little company. They all sat around my kitchen table, joking and reminiscing, their laughter filling the house as we sipped coffee and caught up. But I couldn't shake the slight discomfort as if a current of energy buzzed beneath the surface, charged and dangerous as we talked. I experienced a rush of panic, but I forced a smile inviting them in. Then, almost without thinking, I found myself inviting him alone into the living room. As I stepped away, he grabbed my hand, and I turned to see the other two following in a daze. I led them to the bedroom, feeling the thrill of the forbidden, that sharp, dangerous edge of crossing lines that I had never thought I'd dare before I realized I was giving in to the pressure. Lingering a little too long, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth, I could feel myself reacting, heat rising to my cheeks, my pulse quickening. He was home, and there was no hiding or slipping back into the life I'd carefully built. He was here, and we were all frozen in a moment of suspended horror. He stood in the doorway, his eyes widening, his face changing into a mask of betrayal and shock. "What the hell is this?" He spat, his voice low, barely above the surface. Fire to the intoxicating reckless release that drowned out every rational thought I'd held on to for years. His voice was a whisper, but each word was like a blow. His face twisted, his eyes flashed with raw fury, and I felt like my world was falling apart in real time. I tried to speak, but I couldn't. I watched helplessly as he reached into his pocket and took out his phone, taking pictures, his jaw clenched, his hand shaking, my heart racing as it dawned on me that he was documenting this, preserving the evidence of the betrayal. I wanted to yell, but there was nothing I could say to make it better, no words that would erase it. With anger etched on his face, JN switched on his heel phone and I heard him calling someone from the hallway. I heard snippets of the conversation. "Dad, you need to come over here now, bring a couple of the guys." The line went dead, and he hung up and stormed out of the house. I could feel my whole body shaking, my mind racing through all the possible outcomes, but they were all grim. I could hear John's friends behind me shuffle nervously as the full weight of the situation weighed down on us all. John returned his father in tow a few minutes later, along with two other men from his company who were burly and broad-shouldered and whose faces I could only vaguely recognize. His father's face was grim and dark as he looked from me to the men in the room, his jaws set like stone. He took one long, furious look around before turning back to John and nodding as if to confirm something that didn't require words. "What the hell do you think you're doing in my son's house?" John thundered, his voice shaking with rage, followed by a dry spark. Tinder chaos broke out when John rushed forward with his father at his side, and the altercation turned violent and desperate. There was a clash of fists and bodies, and shouts filled the air as Junk's anger erupted into a fury I had never seen in him before. I stood frozen in shock as the room fell into chaos, the men scurrying to defend themselves, but John and his father were relentless years of loyalty, love, and pride shattered in an instant, and now became violent. Hollow and defenseless, the fight raged, the scene burned into my mind, and there was no turning back. The violence was a blur of raw and vicious sounds, including fists hitting flesh, grunts of pain, and glass breaking. John moved like a man possessed, possessing his father's strength in every way, as furious through accusations and curses, his fists being as swift and vicious as ever. Tim and Eric fought back, as if the rage was so immense that it could be contained in words, defensively trying to maintain their position, but Michael, trapped in the corner, raised his hands in an attempt to defuse the situation. "Come on, John," he said, breathless. "This isn't what it looks like." But John stopped him before he could finish. He took another swing, barely missing Michael's face, and Michael ducked to the side. I felt paralyzed, with my back against the wall, and the sounds made me sick to my stomach. I wanted to scream and say something to break this awful reality, but the words died in my throat, and the only sound I could make was a whisper that was barely audible over the chaos. John didn't stop, breathing heavily, his face twisted almost unrecognizable, a mask of pain and betrayal. His father's yells were just as fierce, filled with anger and disgust, and they sent a shockwave through me. The words were more devastating than the violence, asking what kind of woman his father spat, allowed strangers into her bed, and allowed his friends and family to walk all over him. And just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, I saw John's father pull back, staring at Michael in the eye with a cold, deadly anger. "You're no friend of this family," he growled. "Get out and take your trash with you." Michael wiped his bloodied lip and looked at me with a look that was both horrifying and deadly. I couldn't deny the brutality of the truth. These weren't strangers. They were men we'd known, laughed with, and shared our lives. He opened his mouth to say something, perhaps to defend himself, but his father raised a fist, and Michael decided against it. He then backed toward the door, with Tim and Eric immediately behind him. When they left, there was an unconscionable silence, and I felt completely stripped of all pretense. John stood in front of me, his chest heaving, his face still a mask of pain and fury, and his father stood a few steps behind him, arms crossed, staring at me with nothing but disdain. John's voice was low and raw. "How long has this been going on?" His words were clipped and barely controlled, as if speaking them might cause something even darker inside him to come out. I opened my mouth in a desperate attempt to explain, but the words caught in my throat. What could I say? It began with loneliness, when I felt invisible and lost, but now that I had betrayed him in the worst way possible, I forced myself to speak, trembling. "John, I never meant what." He cut me off, his voice rising. "Was never intended for me to learn of it, never intended to let my friends into our bed, and never intended to make fun of me." The way he said it was so hollow and bitter, as if the man I had known for so long had been replaced by a stranger. I felt tears well up in my eyes, and my voice was barely audible. I was so alone, John, that he laughed harshly and without humor. "You decided that this was the answer," and he pointed to the door to the empty area where his friends had been standing only moments before his father stepped. "I'm filing for divorce," he said in a low, deadly calm voice. "I'm filing, and I'm going for full custody." The words hit me like a punch, and I staggered backward, shaking my head, the reality of it crashing over me. "John, please, please, the kids." Looking at me with disgust, John looked down, shaking his head, and when he looked up again, his eyes were void, the love I'd relied on for so long stripped away, leaving only the bare, unforgiving truth. "I'm done listening to you, I'm done believing you, I want you out, and I'm taking everything that matters with me." I crumpled from the weight of it, the sheer devastation of knowing that he was serious, that this wasn't just anger, that this wasn't just a threat, and that he meant every word. I couldn't stop him, and I could see the resolve in his eyes, a determination to cut me out of his life. "Don't take them from me. I never wanted to hurt them, I never wanted any of this, save it." When he turned to leave, I instinctively reached out for him, my hand grasping for him, but he pulled away, his face full of hate. "Don't ever touch me again," he said in a low voice, each word sharp and final. Then, leaving me alone in the wreckage of my own making, I fell to the floor, feeling the weight of everything I had lost. The house felt hollow, as if every last bit of warmth had been torn out, leaving only silence and the echoes. I'm not sure how long I stood in the aftermath of John's departure, replaying every horrible moment in my mind, unable to shake the emptiness that clung to me like a second skin. The reality of what I'd done settled in my stomach like a heavy weight when I knew I'd never truly escape, but it wasn't until JN returned the following day that I felt the full force of what I'd lost. He didn't look at me as he moved through the house gathering things, his face stony and unyielding. I tried to talk to him, but he didn't look at me. When I finally found the right words to say, he stopped, his expression cold and unmoved. "I'm not here to listen to excuses," he said, cutting me off before I could say more. "I'm only here to get what I need." I stumbled after him, desperately clawing at my chest, saying, "John, please, please. I know I hurt you, I know I can't take back what I did, but I'm pleading with you not to take the kids from me. I've already spoken to a lawyer, and he's made it clear that I have every right to seek full custody after what you've done. You've shown that you don't care about this family or our children, and you lost the right to be their mother when you made this decision." The lawyer's words hit me like a blow, leaving me speechless. He had already put plans into motion, and I realized with a sinking dread that he was serious and wouldn't let me plead my way out of this or cling to whatever. When he left to file the paperwork, I was left alone in the house with the empty silence pressing in around me. The walls felt darker and closer, as if the house itself were turning against me. This life I had built with him was slipping away from me, and I had no one to blame but myself. The enormity of what I had done hit me in waves, each one stronger than the last, and I felt trapped, suffocating under the. For the first time in my life, I felt genuine, unadulterated regret for the things I had done, not only for the betrayal but also for the destruction I had caused to my family. I had traded everything for a brief moment of validation and a few minutes of feeling wanted, but now I was more alone than ever as I sat there trying to comprehend the damage the life I'd thrown away and the weight of my choices, frightened that I'd lost everything I'd once cherished: my children. They were innocent in all of this, and no matter what I'd done, I was still their mother, so I couldn't give up on that. As the hours passed, a small, fragile thought came to me from the kids. If nothing else, I needed to try and hold on to them, to at least be there for them in whatever capacity JN would allow. This thought steadied me and pulled me out of my despair, and I wasn't sure if John would ever forgive me or if he'd even. I knew the road to forgiveness is long because I've destroyed everything I held dear, but maybe, just maybe, I could earn back a place in their lives one small step at a time. I lost my husband, and perhaps I'd never truly regain his respect or love, but I couldn't let go of my children because they were all I had left. I had to try because I owed it to them and to myself to fight for whatever chance I had left. Even if it meant starting over, I'd prove to him and to them that I could be better. The one aspect of my life that still mattered, but as I sit here alone in the wake of what I've done, I wonder if I'm fooling myself, if there's any way to fix this, if I should even try to make amends, or if it's selfish of me to even think I deserve a second chance. I'm asking you because I don't know what else to do. I can't take back what I've done, but I can't bear the thought of losing my children. Should I fight for them, try to hold on to this one last piece of my life, or should I let them go to give them a chance at a life untarnished by my errors? I just know that I cannot turn back time or reverse the decisions I have made, but I still need to know whether there is ever a way to put things right.